This session, thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. So this session is called Equity-Centered Social Emotional Learning, SEL. According to Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning, CASEL, SEL can be used to intentionally drive systemic change, uplift marginalized voices, and promote belonging and equity. In this workshop, we will explore how social and emotional learning, or SEL, can be used as a key strategy in promoting the understanding of equity in schools and communities. It is a great honor to introduce and pass it over to Stacy and Linsey, who will be doing their own introductions today. And I just wanted to make a quick note before I do that I will be tech support today. So if you are having any issues with audio or your computer, you can direct message me in the chat. And my name is listed as tech host. So you can just send me a message through the chat. So without further ado, we'll pass it along to Stacy and Linsey. Thank you for your time.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are excited about this session and sharing this information with you. My name is Stacy Bender-Fayette. I live and work in Bemidji, Minnesota. I'm a social and emotional learning specialist, but more importantly, I've been a teacher for 25 years. Most of my experience has been in the areas of professional development. So I'm excited. The last 6 years, it was around the age of 40 when I started asking myself some questions. What is the legacy that I want to leave the education world? And I decided it was social emotional learning. It is an area that I have been passionate about for a long time. And I can truly say, not many people can say this, probably you folks on this call could say this, but it feels so good when your values align with your work. And I can honestly say that from my heart. I am really proud of the work that we do at Peacemaker Resources. And I'm excited to be here with my colleague, Linsey. I'll pass to you, Linsey.
Thanks, Stacy. Bonjour. Gawin apaji ni nata anishnabe mosi nenga kagwejatun ji anishnabe moyan. Nin Linsey indigenous jagana shimam kazagasquajimakag endunjiba edash walker enda. Welcome, everyone. My name is Linsey McMurrin. I am a citizen of the Leech-like Nation of Ojibwe. I live in the Walker area, and like many of you, I wear many hats. So in addition to my role at Family Wise Services as Director of Prevention Initiatives and Tribal Projects, I also am with Peacemaker Resources as a social and emotional learning specialist. What's particularly interesting to me about that is when I first began at Peacemaker Resources, we hadn't even landed on social and emotional learning as the apt description for what it is that we do. In fact, for a while, I was a cooperative life skills specialist. And so if you've come to this session wondering, what is SEL? That might give you some hints. Cooperative life skills specialist. There was a variety of different titles, different lingo that kind of went with the work that we've always done at Peacemaker Resources. 20 plus years we've been doing this work around bringing social and emotional learning to communities. As I said, the name has changed a little bit, but the underlying intent and content of what we do has never changed. And it really is about building communities that value connection, compassion, and continued growth and learning. And so we're so pleased to be here with all of you today, as I feel like the work that social emotional learning, that content area brings forth is exactly what our collaboratives and our communities across Minnesota need to be able to continue on this good work of building self-healing communities and a more resilient Minnesota. With that, we want to make some acknowledgements as we begin our time together today. First and foremost, as you've heard us maybe mention in earlier sessions, we want to recognize that all of us are doing the very best that we can through some very difficult circumstances. As was unearthed yesterday during some of our sessions, in particular our regional discussions, while we have had to make a lot of adaptations and a lot of changes over the last year plus that have felt hard, what we also recognize is that we have learned so much for this past year. The spotlight has been put on the disparities that we're seeing in our communities like never before, and they can no longer be ignored. And of course, we're talking about the dual pandemics, right? Both COVID-19 and the racial reckoning, these hard conversations that our country is finally leaning into. We know that because of all of the added stress, most of us are feeling it in our bodies. We want to recognize that and keep in mind that our feelings are indicators, right? We need to pay attention to what they are telling us. Self-awareness is a huge part of social emotional learning, as we'll unpack together today. We also want to echo and recognize that the term resilience can be a very loaded term, and it can have a different connotation depending upon our own experiences, on our own background, on the world around us, the environments and contexts in which we live. We know that for many of us who identify as Indigenous or individuals of color, that we are tired of being resilient. It is time for the systems and policies to change to support us in a way that we don't have to be resilient anymore. We don't have to only merely survive. We need to transcend to thrive. And looking at our community environments through an equity-based lens, through this framework of social emotional learning, we believe provides that roadmap that will get us there. And then finally, we understand that we have an obligation to ensure that the implementation and practices of social emotional learning does not create harm. We don't want it to be another form of policing. We don't want it to be another way of telling folks that they're doing it wrong or that they aren't falling into mainstream society's way of what is right. And as we get further into the conversation today, we'll begin to unpack that a little bit more. But the elements we wanted to acknowledge right from the start in our time together. With that, I'll pass it back to Stacy to lead us through an activity.
Thank you, Linsey. So Linsey and I do a lot of presenting together. And a theme that we have integrated all year long is the statement that you see on the screen in front of you. I recently completed a year-long study with Mindful Schools, and my biggest takeaway was this statement: your regulated nervous system is the best intervention. And let me describe that a little bit. What we're talking about here is oftentimes schools will come to, or agencies, organizations will come to Peacemaker Resources and will ask, what is the magic behavior program that's going to solve all of our schools' problems? What is the magic social emotional learning problem that is going to change the way everyone interacts? And the reality, folks, is the magic is right here. It is you. It is what you do internally. It is that internal work that is so important. So when and this is a social emotional learning competency, self-awareness. When we learn how to be self-aware, it helps us regulate. And when our nervous system is regulated through the science of mirror neurons, that is mirroring to all of those folks around us. And what we've learned through that science is the stronger your connection to someone, the stronger that mirror neuron pull. So let me give you an example. My teenage daughter, when she is feeling stressed or worried, I feel it in my own body, right? And so what I have learned is taking care of myself is no longer something if I have time for. Now I have this obligation to care for myself, because if I am regulated, it is impacting the people around me. So now it's an obligation for me. So with that, we start all of our workshops with some kind of regulation tool. And today we're going to do shoulder roll breathing together. This is one of my favorites this year, since so many of us have been sitting at the computer all day, every day. And some of us hunched over, and we have to remind ourselves, right, to move our shoulders. So what I'd like you to do is, if whatever your hands are doing, just put that down. Let's bring our awareness to the present moment. And whatever being present means for you. For me, being present online means my camera on, because I've learned when my camera's off, I'm looking at my phone, I'm walking to the kitchen. But whatever being present means for you. Find a sense of being present, sitting up nice and tall. And let's go ahead. As you inhale through your nose, I'd like you to move your shoulders up towards your ears. So let's do that part together. Breathing in. And now what I'd like you to do as you exhale, push your shoulders back and down. Let's try that again. Breathing in, moving your shoulders up towards your ears. Holding, and as you exhale, push those shoulders back and down. I invite you to do one more on your own. So most of our work is in schools with social emotional learning, but we also work in the community, teaching adult SEL as well. But what I'd like to share with you is every social emotional learning lesson that we teach in the classroom or online with adults as well, we always start with a regulation tool. Because of the brain science, teaching folks techniques for regulation allows us to move from that amygdala, fight, flight, or flee part of our brain to our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex. So when we work with youth, we give them a whole toolbox, we like to say, of regulation tools so that they can find the tools that work for them, because all of us are different and different tools work for each of us. So I invite you to add shoulder roll breathing to your invisible toolbox so that you can pull that out later when you need to.
We want to acknowledge we are all working incredibly hard in a continual journey of learning and unlearning. That's life, folks. It's part of this work. More broadly, when we think about what it means to create a more resilient Minnesota, it's part of the work when we think about what it means to build self-healing communities. And it is certainly part of the work when we realize that we as individuals are only human. And I've been reflecting a lot about what we are taught in schools versus what we're expected to catch or what is glossed over. And one of the things that I want to bring forward to all of you today is the sentiment you see on the screen here. It's one of our favorite quotes. We always use it in our presentations because this work is hard, especially when maybe some things you thought you knew, you might have to take a step back and re-examine a little bit. So we want to begin our time together, set the tone with these beautiful words from Maya Angelou. She says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And folks, it's that call to action. This information, all of the near science information that we all are learning about here in Minnesota through the More Resilient Minnesota project, from the neurobiology to epigenetics, to adverse childhood experiences, to resiliency. All of it must be learned and we must continue to explore it with this sentiment in mind. We know this is difficult work. We know this might be bumping up against maybe some values or own experiences or histories that you may carry. But again, I strongly believe that we are all here together in this place because we want good things for our children. We want good things for our communities. We want good things for the families, all of the families in our community. And this is the road to get to that place, folks. Really taking time to lean in, to realize that we're not always going to be comfortable, and to realize that that's okay. That's part of this learning process. So I want to encourage you in that as we move forward in our time together today, and to carry grace along with you, both for yourself and for others as we move through this process together. Now, many of you are familiar with the core protective systems. They are those protective factors that buffer that toxic stress that trauma and adversities bring forward. Now, so often when we are giving ACE interface presentations, when we get to the core protective system section, the last section, the resilience section, folks want to know, what can I do now? What is it that I can do to help communities? What is it that I can do to help the young people I work with and their families? The framing that we're going to be using today mirrors that of the ACE interface curriculum, in that we understand and know that thriving communities often have these three nested systems working together. And that is those individual capabilities. Social emotional learning is all about building those individual capabilities and skill sets. Belonging and attachment as provided by positive relationships. Again, the number one thing that makes a difference, despite our histories, despite our traumas, despite the adversities we may have walked through, is if we have caring and competent people by our side. And then lastly, we know that being connected to something bigger than ourselves, that sense of community, that sense of faith or spirituality, whatever your personal preference might be, and cultural processes, those are all parts of what makes us strong, both as individuals as well as families and as communities. And so we really want to approach this work with that mindset in mind. We want this to be something that you can take forward into your own communities and help fill in and really do an assessment. What is already happening in my community that fits within these areas? What is it that we might want to consider adding? So that is really the approach that we're going to be taking today, because we believe strongly that this framework fits so well with the self-healing communities model that many of your communities are already implementing.
Awesome. Thank you, Linsey. And I do want to name, you're gonna hear me, especially because most of my work is in schools, that I'm gonna be referring to schools often, but we're gonna do our best to use the term community today, and whatever community means to you. It could mean your school community. It could mean your workplace community. It could mean the community where you live, right? So you get to define what community means for you today as we work through this process. So as we prepared this presentation today, and Linsey reminded me, Stacy, the 96 people attending aren't necessarily teachers, and very few of them probably are. So some of you may not be familiar with the term social and emotional learning. So for starters, we would like you to take just a scratch piece of paper, and I want you to do a self-reflection right now in what do you believe social and emotional learning is? I'm give you just a moment to do that. Let's do that personal reflection first before we share the definition so you can compare. When you hear the term social and emotional learning, or SEL, what does that mean to you? My parents, who are both retired teachers, I've been in this job 6 years, and they have no idea what I do. They kind of understand, but they kind of don't, because social emotional learning hasn't always been taught explicitly, right? Like it is now. All right, so we are starting to move in and define what SEL is. In the chat, you will notice I posted a document. It is the SEL framework. And in just a moment, but not yet, we're going to have you open up that document. This session today is going to be highly interactive. You're going to be doing some personal work. You're going to be doing some group work. We're going to ask you to respond in the chat. We're also going to ask that you unmute at times and respond. So for starters, let's take a look at the screen in front of us, and then I'm going to let you dive in a little more deeply. So what you see in front of you comes from CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. This is the organization that we are choosing to use their framework in the SEL work that we're promoting. Now, oftentimes when I ask folks, what is social emotional learning? Immediately you think, oh, it's something that's taught in elementary school. It's a way to learn how to work with other people, how to manage ourselves, their life skills. But what I'm going to challenge you with today is social emotional learning isn't just for school. This is a continuum of learning throughout a lifetime. So I want you to move away from that idea that SEL is something that happens and is taught in schools by teachers. These are skills that we can build throughout our lifetime. Most of these skills that I teach today, I did not learn until I was 40. So I always share with folks, because at Peacemaker Resources, sometimes we get a little pushback about social emotional learning. And you can probably predict what that pushback would be. Some folks say, well, isn't this what families should be teaching? Why is the school taking time to teach SEL? And I always use my own experience as an example. I told you already that both of my parents are retired teachers. My parents are wonderful, loving, kind people, but they didn't necessarily teach me all these skills. My heritage is German from Russia. And so based on what my parents learned from their parents is you don't talk about feelings and you avoid conflict whenever possible. That is what I learned in my household growing up. So even though I have these educated parents that are both teachers, they didn't necessarily teach me the skills in social awareness. I learned some relationship skills by watching them, but they didn't teach me how to manage my stress very well, right? So social emotional learning, again, can be taught throughout a lifetime, and they are skills that can help us navigate the world with kindness, with compassion, with empathy, with self-empathy, all of those wonderful things. So what you see in front of you is the CASEL wheel. And I want to acknowledge that CASEL as an organization has made some big changes this year. They have re-released a new definition, is what you see on the screen, and they changed this framework that you see in front of you to be more equity-centered. And all of us in the SEL world said, it's about time, CASEL. Nice work. So when you look at this wheel right now, one of the things that they did differently is those outside blue rings, they separated communities from families and caregivers. And the reason that they did that is they recognized the importance in families and caregivers in teaching these SEL skills. Who is a child's first SEL teacher? Their family or caregiver. So I often frame it this way. When I go to my high school, I have 2 teenage daughters who are in high school. When I go to their parent-teacher conferences, for example, I sit down with the teacher and I listen to them talk about my daughter's grades and the curriculum that they're teaching. Never once have I had a high school teacher ask me, the mother, about my child. And I'm starting to be a little bit offended about that. Like, who knows this child best? Our children's parents, right? Or caregivers. So what CASEL is recognizing right now is the importance of these authentic partnerships in schools and families and communities to best meet the needs in the area of social emotional learning. So what we're going to do next, here's where your work comes in, okay? Using the link that we posted, and Linsey, thank you for posting it again, you're going to find this framework. What we're going to have you do is individually, we want you to read the definition on page 1 of the framework. It is, let me go back, it is this, it should look like this that you see in front of you right now. So your job is to reflect and just jot down on a piece of paper any words or phrases that you really connect to, and then consider why. And we're going to invite you to place your responses in the chat for starters. So as you read, let me give your direction one more time. As you read the definition on page 1 of the framework, just noticing words or phrases that really stand out to you, and then consider why that might be. Thank you for those of you that are using the chat. I'm seeing things like trusting relationships, family community relationships, empower and empathy, develop healthy identities, empower, co-create. Language is important, folks. Authentic. The process, yes, the process through which young people and adults, I want to point that out. Yes, Keela McCracken, young people and adults. Thank you. Partnerships. Caring decisions, that is an addition. That is a new addition to their definition. Co-creating thriving schools and communities. All right, folks, you got this. This is great. So again, our job right now is just to really look at, with a critical lens, what does SEL really mean and how does it speak to us? So our next job is we are going to put you in breakout rooms, small breakout rooms for 8 minutes. You'll be in breakout rooms of approximately 4 people. And what we're going to ask that you do is be prepared, number 1, to do a round of introductions, because part of this is all about connection. So do a quick round of introductions. And then I would like you to take turns responding to one of these 2 questions on your screen. What stands out as very important as you read and discuss this definition, so you can expand on what you're putting in the chat? Or how does SEL connect with what you believe is important for students, adults, schools, and or community? So how does SEL connect with what you believe? So we're aligning with our values and our knowledge, what we know. How and why is this important? All right, Linsey, thank you for putting those questions in the chat. And Linsey, whenever you are ready, we will move to breakouts.
Sounds great. I'm opening rooms now, so you should have a pop-up on your screen to join that breakout room.
Linsey, we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule.
I know, I was noticing that. So
This is amazing. And I am not seeing the timer, so you'll just have to give me a little heads up.
9:43. We'll say 9:42 is when we open, so we'll come back at 9:50.
Okay.
Well,
and folks that are still with us, if you're having trouble, please feel free to unmute or put in the chat any questions that we can help you with.
looks like all rooms at least have 2 people who are active, even
Okay,
for those
great.
that haven't joined. So at least there's they have someone else to talk to, but
Thank you for noticing that.
yeah.
And then Linsey, I think before we go to the next slide, we will do a quick share out, maybe 2 people.
Yep. Sounds great.
I may regret that later based on time, but.
So I've heard conflicting things about whether people can access the chat or not when they're in their breakouts.
I have 2.
And I'm not really sure.
Actually, with that being said, can we post these questions? Can we send those out to the breakout?
I'm gonna have to shorten them. They don't fit. There, they got a shortened version of the questions.
Thank you.
I wish it gave us the option to not assign certain people to breakout rooms. Not that it's a huge deal because we can just come back, but
Manually, right.
yeah.
And maybe one strategy, because the group is so large and I can't see everyone, maybe for sharing out, I'll have 2 people put their name in the chat if they'd like to share.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm going to close the door. I'll be right back.
Sure. I sent them a 2-minute warning.
Thank you. Out of a group of 99 people, lots of participation in the breakout rooms. It's great.
Yes.
So those of you that are just jumping on, perhaps, or coming back from a breakout room, breakout rooms will be closing shortly. So we'll be back together as a large group. All right, looks like our groups are on their way back. This is always the fun part as a facilitator, is to watch when the room automatically closes and everyone kind of comes rushing back. So much easier than standing in a room full of 99 people trying to get their attention to bring them back. I realize as a participant, it can be really frustrating for you, and I apologize if you were cut off mid-sentence. All right. We have, the numbers are still increasing as people come back. We'll give them just a moment. Wonderful.
I just want to say that felt really short.
Did it? I'm sorry, Barb. We're always challenged with how much time
I know.
with an hour and 15-minute session. The goal with the breakout is for you to have some interaction with another person that's with us today. Hopefully that goal was met. Wonderful. All right, as we move forward, we are going to ask for 2 volunteers to unmute and share maybe a theme that came up in their discussion or something that you yourself shared. And the way I would like to do this is, I hate to do it this way, but with this many folks online at one time, just go ahead and put your name in the chat. I don't want to make this a competition, but put your name in the chat if you would like to unmute and share. And we're looking for 2 people to do that today. And again, the ask is if you would be willing to unmute and share what was a common theme in your breakout room, in your discussion, or something you yourself shared with your group. Looking for 2 volunteers. Just go ahead and put your name in the chat. Karen, go for it. And then we'll go to Lisa next.
Okay, so our themes were really, we had people from schools and community and really emotional supports for students, our youth, but it didn't have to just end there. It also depended on the adults being able to make the connections and give the students the emotional support that they needed. There's a Pathfinder group with a community faith-based that really trains people well to support youth emotionally, especially ones that are abused and need healing. But that is a nice example of something we could all benefit from. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your willingness to share, Karen. You just hit on something that is a very important theme in our work. So in the area of social emotional learning in schools, there has been the shift right now in recognizing you can't just have youth SEL programs. You need to provide this training for adults, adult SEL. And there's really this shift in learning right now. Some of the schools that we've served for a number of years, we went in and we implemented SEL programs in every classroom in the school. And then we heard from the staff, wait a minute, I don't see my colleagues using these skills. And in one school in particular, we had to step back and we focused solely this year on really building the adults' SEL skills, because that is truly how the students are learning, by watching the adults in the building. Thank you for sharing, Karen. Let's go to Lisa next.
Hi, can I please pass it to Randy, refer to Randy Wrestler? I was just, putting my name in for the sake of time. I work for Family Wide Services and I would like to hear from others. So Randy, if you don't mind.
Aw, thank you, Lisa. Good to see you, by the way.
You too.
No, that's fine. I'm Randy Rissler, and in our group, we had a very mutual thought process that, and we focused on the second part of that. How does SEL connect with what you believe is important for students and adults and communities? And the overall consensus was that it's not just what we believe in, but it's kind of the core of our work. We had 4 people in our group. 2 are children's mental health workers. The other 2, of course, work in this system in different collaboratives. And one person, Amy, mentioned that she does work prenatally, and how that is so important to not forget about that huge piece of the prenatal part of the work that some of us do. And it is such our core. And I come from, in part with CMH and also some child protection background. And I think that what you touched on earlier is that we can't just leave it up to the families in these homes to be teaching these kids that this is how we are going to help them communicate. We need to be continually doing more in our school systems.
Yes, and in the school systems, inviting families in as well. So in some of our schools, we've been running SEL family nights. We also have a middle school SEL program where middle schoolers are teaching adults and teaching teachers social emotional learning skills. So thank you, Randy. We agree. I feel like today we're preaching to the choir a little bit, knowing the work that you do and the importance of these skills. And I appreciate you sharing, Randy. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Linsey.
We also want to name the elephant in the room. There is a very real and present danger of social emotional learning being used as another tool to oppress. That is one thing that we want to name from the forefront. That is one thing that we want each and every one of you who are here trying to learn about equity-centered SEL to really understand. Stacy just popped in an article by Dina Simmons, you see on the screen, diving into this topic a little bit further. But what I want to share with you, Dina Simmons is an activist, educator, and student of life from the Bronx. She's founder of Liberate Ed, an anti-racist approach to social and emotional learning and healing. So what Dina talks about is new initiatives happening within broken systems of education with a history of exclusion and inequality. So we've talked already about how systems and policies must change in order to support the individual healing, the individual buffers of relationship, attachment, and belonging. We need all of that to happen at the same time. However, what we need to realize is that when we implement SEL programs, we need to ensure that we are not perpetuating the damage and harm that has already been done to BIPOC individuals. For instance, both social emotional learning and mindfulness programs, they should not be used as discipline programs. And that is often where we run into problems, when it becomes another form of policing. That is the absolute last thing that our communities need. What we do need is to approach this work, both social emotional learning, as well as mindfulness and other protective buffer systems. We need to approach it as a way to teach not only young people, but adults as well, the skills that we need to be successful in relationships. That self-awareness, that responsible and caring decision-making, that's all part of this work, folks. That's all part of this process. We know that there is what people, there's two ways to learn, right? What's taught, what we tell people, as well as what's caught. And that is what we learn by watching adults and others in our lives model the way that they handle problems. So let's think about that for a moment. All of the things that we model for our kids, for the clients we serve, whether we realize it or not. It's about how we handle mistakes. It's about how we deal with frustration. It's about how we solve problems and how we take care of ourselves. It's how we apologize and repair harm when harm's been done. It's about how we ask for help. It's about how we speak up for both ourselves and for others, and how we navigate conflict. All of those things, along with also how we approach differences, these are the skill sets that we're talking about when we talk about social and emotional learning. These are the same skill sets that are going to get us along a lot further in that our struggle, our journey towards creating a more equitable society, because it teaches us how to have these difficult conversations. It teaches us how to be aware of what's going on within ourselves, both our bodies and our minds, as we navigate courageous conversations. This is all part of the work, folks. It can't be separated out. And what this really leads us to is this framing of transformative SEL. What do we mean by that? What we're talking about is utilizing these skills that we have already mentioned, and both with children and with adults, to really build those strong and respectful relationships that are going to get us through those hard times, that are going to get us through those difficult conversations. When we really are able to, again, look at the roots of the problems that we're having, that will allow us to begin to really fix what needs to be fixed, rather than just creating these Band-Aid type solutions that has been the status quo for far too long. So again, what we really encourage folks in this room, in this space, to think about is social emotional learning provides tools, not only for kids, but for adults, for our entire communities, to really work towards this overall goal of building self-healing communities that we're all here to be a part of. Finally, we wanted to share with you a little bit more information on that in terms of what does that look like. It can be everything from really focusing in on those authentic partnerships, right? Relationship. We know especially that those of us who've been through traumas and adversities are really good at sniffing out inauthenticity, right? And so if we want to be true to ourselves, to this work, to those that we're working with, then we can utilize this framework, these skill sets, to really build our own capacity in navigating difficult conversations, and in bringing our clients, those we serve, our own families, folks, right? This work is not only about only when we're wearing our professional hats. In fact, I think Stacy and I can both speak to the fact of how transformative this has been in our personal relationships as well, from the way I interact with my own children, to my partner, to the grocery store clerk at the store, okay? This is really about a lifelong process and skill set that really is infused everywhere in your life. It's not just something you take off the shelf when you feel like focusing in on it, okay? Anything you want to add to that piece, Stacy?
No, I just want to add that I did note, if you want to take a look at these core features, I apologize, a slide with this many words should never happen, but I just wanted to point it out, and then you should also have the link. Although I just received a note that someone is having a hard time opening that link. Oh, to the Dina Simmons article. Okay, let's see. Yep, there it is. Let me know if you're still having difficulty, and I will do what I can to help. Maybe hang out after and we'll solve that together. Great, thank you, Linsey. So again, this is the work that CASEL, the Collaborative for Social and Emotional Learning, has really made changes in bringing in this equity-centered approach, which we really appreciate. It's understanding all of the hard work, right? SEL shouldn't just be about rainbows and unicorns, which some of us think about that, right? We think about, oh, it's about gratitude and mindfulness and positivity, which is what now sometimes is referred to toxic positivity. So really, if we are going to look at SEL programs include that hard work, or SEL skills include that hard work of examining prejudice and bias and taking a look at identity and how we are similar and how we are different. All of that good work. So what we're going to do next is you have an opportunity again. We're going to go back to the framework in just a moment, and we're going to give you another task. And again, our goal today is for you to really be immersed in this work and to figure out what parts of this are really important to you and your community, whatever that community may be. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the 5 competency areas which you see in the center of this circle. We have self-awareness and self-management. We have social awareness and relationship skills, and we have responsible decision-making. So when CASEL released its new equity-centered language, what we noticed immediately is in the definitions of these 5 competency areas, you will now see equity language, which we're happy about. So we're going to give you a chance to dive in a little deeper now. So you're going to be using the framework again. Linsey, would you mind copying and pasting that? So it's this document again. And what we're going to ask of you is you're going to take a look at page 2. Page 2 is full of text. Don't be afraid of that. We're going to give you some time. But notice, this is where the understanding really happens, because you look at the individual skills that fall under each competency. So notice under self-awareness, there is a description, and then you will notice some bullets that talk about what are we talking about when we're saying self-awareness. Part of it, the equity language you see, is examining prejudice and biases. When we look at self-management, what does that include? Managing one's emotions, exhibiting self-discipline and self-motivation, setting personal and collective goals. So this is going to be your opportunity to dig in a little deeper. Let me give you your assignment. Your assignment is to reflect, just read through those 5 competencies, noticing any words or phrases that stand out as a priority to you. What stands out to you as a priority? And then next, what we're going to allow you to do, you see 2 questions on your screen that we're going to invite you to post in the chat because we don't have time for another breakout. But we want you to consider, share an example of one of these skills. For example, when we could look back at the competency, when I talk about skills at some of those bullets, like managing one's emotions, okay? So you're going to look at one of the skills that is prioritized that is prioritized and or supported in your community. So share an example of that. Or you can respond to the second prompt there. Does this priority connect to the goal of advancing equity and excellence? If so, how? And I guess some of that kind of goes together. So you might, for the second prompt, have to give us a little bit more. So what is the priority that stood out to you? And does it connect with the goal of advancing equity and excellence? So I'm going to stop talking so you can do some reading and responding, and we will give you 5 minutes to do so.
Can you put the slide back on the screen, please?
Sure. Let me copy these questions in the chat first.
Thank you.
Linsey, do you have access to these questions? Thank you. Let me go back to I'm guessing that you're looking for this slide.
Yes, that's the one.
I realize it might be hard for you to read The link is also posted as SEL Framework document in the chat if you want to open it on your own computer. So when you are ready, we invite you to share in the chat one of the skills that is being prioritized and or supported in your community. That could be school community, workplace community, place you live, family community. What are those skills that are being prioritized or supported? And if you want to expand on that, how does it connect to the goal of advancing equity and excellence? And I'm going to leave it even more broad. If you'd just like to share something that you find as really important, one of these skills that you would like to see that is emphasized in your community, feel free to share that as well. Thank you for the comments already. Youth-driven bistro. That's cool, Karen. Responsible decision-making, absolutely. Social awareness comes up a lot, I'm noticing. Yeah, the importance of responsible decision-making. And a note about really coming into play that this year in particular, needing to figure out what news is right and what news is not, and how our beliefs align with each of those. Understanding the influences of organizations and systems on behavior, yes. Oh, a book study Awesome. Youth voice groups at high school and middle school. I'd love to learn more about that, Melanie. Yeah, focusing on strengths and assets, and then examining our prejudice and bias. Yes. Yes, we need to know where, oh, Shar, I hear you. We need to know where we're strong at, so we are better able to take a look at the areas that we need growth in. There is science that supports that, research that supports that. Thank you for sharing. Using our voice, awesome. Thank you, folks. A lot of great information being shared, and we appreciate that. It's just diving into this work a little bit more. I'd like to share one example that I observed this year in the area of responsible decision-making. So when we build this empathy and when we start to begin to understand who we are, Cass Lake High School, I'm going to share an example from their school. Some of the students at their school were beginning to talk openly about gender identity, and were asking the school community to allow them to use different pronouns. And what these high school students noticed is the teachers did not have enough information in this area. So what did these students do in an effort to make change in their school? They considered who can teach this topic. So the students approached the health teacher and challenged the health teacher to bring into their health curriculum a discussion about gender identity and to explain pronouns so that the students could understand and the teachers could understand. And from there, they're working to make change in their school. And from there, the administrator caught wind of this, and he invited Peacemaker in to do a workshop for the teachers on LGBTQ plus content. So that is what we're talking about, right? With these skills of compassion and understanding, and then we're bringing in, how do we communicate effectively? How do we make change? Putting all of those skills into play with that responsible decision-making aspect. All right, that is transformative SEL. Let's go back to our slides. Thank you for sharing, folks. And we have a video that we would like to share with
There are
you.
many teachers already doing great work, and
Sorry, I'm gonna pause. Lindsay, do you want to intro the video at all?
I just wanted to point out Anna Lynn's comment in the chat regarding that example you gave regarding Cass Lake being a student, a powerful demonstration of self-efficacy and agency. Folks, individual capabilities, that is exactly part of what we are trying to support and build within individuals, whether we're working with youth or adults throughout community. So again, thanks Anna Lynn for voicing that, because again, that is a perfect example of often what so many of us are wanting to see, especially after hearing the content in the ACE Interface curriculum. What does this look like implemented? What does this look like in real life? So think about that example, how powerful it is, because not only are individuals building their capacity in those areas, but it's also affecting systems and policy change. That, my friends, is exactly what we're all working towards.
Yes. So the video that you're about to see is Dina Simmons. We might be a little obsessed with her right now. Her work is so powerful in our field. And this short video is going to provide for you some examples of how to be an anti-racist educator. And what you're going to see is there are lots of different ways to do this in this short video. Here we go.
I just want to take the time to thank them and to big them up for the magic that they're creating in their classrooms. We can all get better at our practice and put in the anti-racist and equity lenses to our work to ensure that we do no harm. Good instruction should be student-centered, and student-centered is being culturally responsive and being anti-racist. And so for the teachers, one way to get better is really to start with self, really check in with yourself. What are my biases? How are we being self-aware? So, you know, if I'm a teacher or curriculum developer, let's check this for an anti-racist lens. Let's check this for a culturally responsive lens. Now let's do the research and ask people what they mean and really be deliberate about that self-awareness so that we're not imposing our values. We have to be mindful of our power and not abusing it. Another thing that I would say is the collective work. Get together with your crew and learn together. And that learning can happen through book clubs. It could be looking at videos and going to talks or sitting through online Zoom conversations. There's so many ways that we can learn, but it doesn't just stop at reading or watching. It's talking about, now that we know, how will we do better? So coming up with a plan to do more with each other and to hold each other accountable. I also have people think about what's their curricula look like. Is what I'm teaching representative of my students? Am I affirming my students in what I teach and how I teach? Am I affirming my students when I interact with them? So really asking those questions of self and of our practice so that we ensure that our students are safe. I would also push educators to really think about the larger context. Where are students coming from? What are their stories? How can I learn their stories? What's my plan to get to know the stories of my students, of their families? And I think we need to really start asking our students and our communities what they need. I think too often we go up in communities, we go into our classrooms and we think we know what people need. If we don't ask them what they need, we're not giving them what they need. And so we constantly have to ask the people that we are in partnership with how we can do better and how to learn together.
I so
There are
appreciate
many teachers already doing great.
I do that all the time, Linsey. I'm so sorry. Let's
Gotta
try
love
that again. There we go.
I so appreciate the way Dina Simmons is able to give us concrete examples of what that looks like in the real world, right? I think that's so helpful. It's one thing to read about the social emotional learning competencies on a page, right? But to really take a step back and think about, how does this play out in the real world? I think that is so helpful, I think, for all of us to really wrap our heads around what it is we're talking about. Another thing that I want to be sure to mention here, when I am in community, in particular giving our ACE interface presentations, one framing that I continually return to is that when we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, how folks have been impacted, we're talking about the whole gamut, right? We're talking about those people who come in and say, I have an ACE score of 0. What is my place in this work? As well as those folks who have an ACE score of 10+. Now, I bring up that framing because so often well-intentioned folks will come into our trainings thinking about the others, right? How can I help the children I serve? How can I help the families I serve? How can I, help and all those things? And that's important. I'm not saying that we take that away, but here's the thing. We must start with ourselves first. Regardless of our own adversity, trauma history, regardless of our level of education, each one of us carries with us our experiences, our own family histories, our own way of moving through the world. And what we need to realize is that we as caretakers, we as helping professionals, we must model these social emotional learning skills continually if we are ever going to see the change that we want to see elsewhere. So often helping professionals come in with, again, just that framework of it's about the other. It's about helping those people. When we really, if we're to do this in an authentic way, must realize that it starts within and then ripples out from there. Again, it's not just about treating the symptoms, it's about treating root causes. So the root cause here is knowing ourselves knowing our own values and our own purpose, our own identity, what drives us, and then noticing how does that ripple out in the way that I interact with the clients I serve, in the way that I walk through the world, in the way that I act. That's what I'm talking about. So again, it's both and. Yes, we need to be actively building skills within youth and adults who may have, for whatever reason, not been able to focus on building those capacities, those skill sets at whatever point in life. And we must be also continually looking inward for a lifelong journey of both learning and unlearning to really be authentic in bringing this work forward in a good way. All right, now, what I also want to mention is the point you see on the screen here. We live in Minnesota, folks. We know that Minnesota nice is a real thing. And yes, there's some good things to be said about it, right? But then there's that envious underbelly of Minnesota nice, which means we don't have hard conversations. We talk about the weather, we talk about the local sports team, but the minute that something maybe a little bit divisive or conflict causing arises, that's generally when we retreat. We must recognize that in order to be authentic, to truly change, to truly be the change we wish to see, that is going to require us to feel uncomfortable at times. Remember that poem that we shared in the opening session yesterday about invitation to a brave space. We're inviting you to a brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. What's safe to you, what's safe to the majority may in fact be that exact system that is perpetuating harms against communities that have been marginalized and oppressed for far too long. It is time to stand up. It is time to be brave. It is time to flex our own muscles in terms of courage and feeling a bit of discomfort, and to realize that it is all about working towards the greater good. It is all about coming together in a real, authentic way. Social emotional learning provides the tools and the understanding and the building of capacities and capabilities that will get us to that place. That is why we feel so passionate about the fact that social emotional learning, social justice movements, they walk hand in hand. This is the work that we are called to. And I'm so thankful to see 97 people leading into it.
Yes, thank you. I want to leave you, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to leave you, actually, I want to challenge you with a little scenario. This is a real life scenario. My colleague who's also on this call, Keela McCracken, and myself were meeting with a high school principal. And what we heard from him is a little bit of frustration. He was sharing that he was contacted by law enforcement, hearing that one of his students was receiving racist comments via Snapchat, okay? And this principal, as he was sharing it with us, we could feel that he's holding this weight on his shoulders. And he's saying to us, but the Snapchat messages weren't even sent during the school day. Stacy, what is our role here? Right? What is our role? And we all grappled with that together. And I want you, I'm going to just pause for a moment and for you to think for yourself, what is the role for the school in regards to racist comments being sent on Snapchat outside of school time? So based on what we just learned, looking at the 5 competency areas, what are your ideas? And I invite you to put those in the chat. We do not expect the school to carry all the weight of this. That is not fair. This work needs to be done in community, right? With authentic partnerships with one another to build these skills. But what Keela and I did share with this principal, and some of you may still be responding and feel free to do that, is we talked about, oftentimes we hear from teachers that when there are racist comments that come up in the classroom, they are ignoring those comments. And the reason that they're ignoring those comments is they don't know what to say. They're afraid. They're afraid to tackle the issue. They're afraid to have conversations with their students about race. So what is the school's responsibility? In our brainstorming, we talked about the school. We need to provide training for our teachers. We need to give our teachers opportunities to have these hard discussions with one another so that they feel more comfortable having these discussions when problems arise in their classroom. I also think schools can teach digital citizenship. We need, a lot of teachers are shying away from that too. And I have 2 teenage daughters. I know the amount of time that kids spend on devices. So we need to build those discussions in as well. All right, lastly, our time is up, by the way. I'm gonna skip ahead. Here's the action that we're asking of you. And you can put this in the chat or just consider for yourself. What are the next best steps for you to promote SEL in your community? And with that, we thank you. Thank you for all your participation today. Thank you for being students and also learners and teachers as well, as you shared in your small groups and in chat. There's a lot of good stuff there. We'll leave the chat open for a bit if you want to scroll through. And Emily, I think you had some comments as well.